So let's, today we're going to probably spend most of our time talking about the new, did you know there was a new fire hardening and defensible space form? And it was modified June 21st, June 22nd, 2022. And we're going to take a look at that form. We're going to talk about how do you get people to fill it out, what's new about it, what do you need to know as an agent, what is the most effective way of getting people to fill it out. And then we're going to also go through probably the earthquake form. And essentially from last week to this week, we're talking about forms that you're going to probably need to get your client to fill out, right? Where they have to think about things and maybe answer some questions. Now, the form is called the Fire Hardening and Defensible Space. It was revised in June of 2022, near the end of the month. And what's different from this, first of all, why did they revise the form? What was wrong with the old form? It looked like a perfectly good form. And the answer is it was kind of confusing, right? The fire hardening part isn't, I don't think, that confusing. But the defensible space part was confusing. And so because, there are a lot of confused real estate agents as well as, buyers and sellers, they've restructured the form to make it a little bit easier. Now, the other form, the old form, was a fire hardening and defensible space, and it was an addendum and an advisory. So the advisory part, which is a discussion about, fire is hot and you don't want to leave wood chips around your house and that sort of all of that stuff that you ought to be prepared for, has been moved into a wildfire advisory form, which would be a good form to give to everybody to sign. But that form, the fire advisory form, which I have a copy of, isn't really anything to fill out. We're talking about the forms to fill out. So to start with, when do you have to do this? Right now, I've sort of summarized A and B. A is what is required for the home fire hardening disclosure, and essentially there's four things, right? Four things. The property has to be 1 to 4 units. The seller is required to complete a transfer disclosure statement. The property is located in either a high or very high, let me see if I can do this better, fire hazard zone. Let's see if I can do it that way. Not too much. All right. And 4, the constructed before January 1st. All right. So my highlighter isn't really doing so well when I'm using samples, but I'll just clarify. Do you have to do it for a condo? The answer is yes. Is a condominium a 1 to 4 unit residential property? The answer is yes. So is a townhouse. So is a single family home. Now, if the property is located in a condominium complex or a townhouse where there's an HOA, then the homeowner association generally has responsibility for following, for doing what needs to be done, right? But the answer is, that's a very good question. The answer is yes. It includes condominiums, townhomes, everything, right? So the 4 requirements are 1 to 4 units residential. It has to be a kind of property for which a TDS is required. What that would mean, if you have a survivor trustee, right, a survivor trust, you have a vested trust, if you have a probate sale, if you have a guardianship sale, a bankruptcy sale, if you have a interspousal transfer as a result of a dissolution of marriage, right, there's a list of things for which a transfer disclosure statement is not required. And if a TDS is not required, then this is not required. New home subdivisions, for example, there's no TDS because you get a public report. Also, this would not be required. So 1 to 4 units, residential, a property for which a TDS would be required. And then number 3, it has to be in either a high or very high fire hazard severity zone. This has been a problem. And the reason it's been a problem is that the NHD companies, for a long time, and some maybe even still today, were simply following what the civil code says and they were doing very high, but not necessarily high fire zones. Most of that has been changed. I don't know about a mobile home, but Danny, that's a good question. I've never heard the answer to that, right? That would give me something to do later. But the mobile home would typically be in a mobile home park. And so the mobile home park would probably be the one that would have the requirements, but I don't know about mobile homes. And so let's go through the 1 to 4 units. TDS is required, high or very high fire hazard severity zone, and built before January 1st, 2010, right? For fire hardening, all 4 of those conditions have to be met. Now notice what it says. Notice what it says here. I'll use my spotlighter. If any of these 4 conditions is not met, seller does not have to answer the questions in paragraph 2B, right? So, and if all of those aren't true, then we just move on. The part that's a little more difficult, more challenging, is the defensible space compliance. And what it does is it repeats 3 out of the 4 requirements for fire hardening. What's missing is the January 1st, 2010, right? That's missing. But still, the others, the property has to be 1 to 4 units. The seller is required to do a TDS, and it's located in a high or very high severity zones. If any of these 3 conditions are not met, then you don't have to complete paragraph 3. So obviously, finding out in advance, is it in a high fire hazard zone, moderate fire? What exactly? Where is it? Right now, most NHD companies, and let me see, I have an example. Most NHD companies are on this, and if yours isn't, then I would, change NHD companies. So this is a sample from our friends at Fidelity. It's Fidelity is the name of the company. It's Disclosure Source is the name of the home warranty. Now you'll see that what they're asking is it in a special flood zone area? No. Potential flooding, a very high fired zone, and I have to get the whole report, but then is it in flooding? And so most of the NHD companies are now telling you whether or not it's in what zones it's in, right? And if you were curious, you would talk to your NHD company. That would be another discussion. But the NHD company buried in their report is going to answer the questions for you. You'll also notice that there's a link that could be found in the form which is a CAL FIRE site, and you can read about it and doing all of this other stuff, and they actually have a way for you to check and see whether or not your property is in the zone. So here is a link, and you click on continue, and here's a viewer, and you can scroll in, and you can look for yourself. So how would you find out? Well, 1, ask your NHD company whether or not it's in a high or very high. The wording that's in the beginning of the NHD report doesn't say high, it just says very high, because when the civil code was written about NHD reports, they didn't just say high, they wanted very high, but they'll tell you later in the report. Notice you also can get a AB 38, that's what this is lovingly referred to, defensible space inspection, right? And where, you can get an inspection and you can fill out a request form and they will send somebody out to come and look at how defensible your space is. All right, so we need to know, is it in a high or very high fire hazard zone, right? We need to know the answers to these questions. Now I'm going to show you how we would fill it out. One of the improvements, if we want to put it that way, is they've redone the form so that it gives you yes or no answers, and it looks more like a TDS or an SPQ. And so it starts, this is paragraph 2, with the statutory notice. The home is located in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone. It's built before the implementation of the urban, and anyhow, you can read it. And then it asks them specific questions. Eave, soffit, roof ventilation, where vents have openings in excess of 1/8 are not flame or ember reserve, yes or no? Right now, these are questions that your client may or may not know the answer to, right? But this part is to the best of their ability. Are you, this is, look at the wording of it here. Let me get my pointer out. Are you, the seller, aware of any of the following features, which may make the home vulnerable? Now, what that would mean is that if the seller says, I'm not really sure what a soffit is, and I have no idea whether or not they're 1/8 of an inch or not, flame, or I don't know, then are you aware? You'd say, no, I don't know. I'm not aware of that, right? The roof covering is made from untreated wood shingles or shakes. Now, that's something they ought to be aware of, right? Because, you know, you could look at your roof and see, is it, you know, old wood shake or not? So if the answer is yes, it's an old wood shake roof, you'd click on yes. Combustible landscaping within 5 feet, yes or no? Single pane, non-tempered glass windows, I don't know, then that would be a no, right? If you don't know, then it's a no because you're not aware of it. Loose, missing, bird stopping, or roof flashing, whatever, yes or no? And rain gutters without metal or non-combustible gutter covers, yes or no? Now, these are the disclosure questions pretty much at this point. There's one more coming up. Now, you as the agent are not going to be allowed to answer these questions for them and send it to them for signature. They're going to have to answer the questions, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Can we get 2B answers by asking an inspector? The answer is yes. If you get, now by an inspector, I don't necessarily mean a property inspector, because I'm not aware that property inspectors are inspecting this. But if you were to get an inspection from CAL FIRE, they're going to look at this, right? They're going to go through and, you know, do a complete report. I hope you all are aware of the fact that this is a big issue in California, particularly with droughts and heat waves and things like that. Plus, you know, it's kind of a law. So let's talk about the defensible space disclosure and addendum. And it says paragraph 3 is only required if all 3 conditions in 1B are met, right? Because remember, 1A was the fire hardening, 1B is defensible space. And one of the things that has been added is this tree, a decision tree, right? Which is, I think, an appropriate euphemism when we're talking about fires and things like that. And it's a way to figure out how to answer the questions. So let's start with going through the form. The first one, and this is the big issue a lot of time, is there a local law that's in effect, a local ordinance? Is there or is there not? Now, this is a question. This is not a, are you aware of a local law, a local vegetation management ordinance, right? This isn't a, are you or are you not aware of it? This is a, is there or is there not one? So what if the seller says, I don't know, right? I don't know, you know? So what you're going to need to do is to find out. Now, how would you find out? That link that to CAL FIRE would give you links, right, where you could find them. You could also call the local fire departments and ask, right, is there a law? Most of the time you could find this by Google searching, because in the areas where they have these. Now, most areas don't, but some do, right? I know that in Truckee, they have local laws. It depends, right? And as a real estate agent, this would give you perhaps an opportunity to show value. I don't know. You know, I mean, because when we're working, you know, I mean, there's a lot of things that real estate agents used to do that are being automated and done by other people, but someone's going to have to find out, is there a local ordinance or not, right? This has to be answered, right? Now, this is assuming we're talking about a property that meets those three requirements: 1 to 4 units, right? 1 to 4 units. TDS is required, and it's in a high or very high fire zone. If it's not, then you don't have to do this. Seller representation of property compliance. Within the applicable state defensible space requirement or local vegetation management ordinance at the time of seller's signature. Now, A was a yes or no, there is or there isn't question. B is back to awareness. Now notice, excuse me, the default setting is that the seller is unaware of whether or not the property is in compliance with an applicable state or local defensible space law. Seller does not have a report provided by an authorized defensible space inspector. Now, I think some of you may have already gotten the idea that if the seller went and got a report from an authorized defensible space inspector, this would make the whole thing a lot easier, right? Because you'd actually have it and you would know if it is or isn't in compliance and what would need to be done, and you could bring it into compliance. But that is the default setting. The seller does not have a report. Right now, if the seller does have a report and we know that the property is in compliance, we would check the second box. By we mean the client. But this may require some, help, right, with you. I'm just saying. If it is in compliance, we check the box. If only state law applies, seller must have obtained compliance within the last 6 months, right? So that's a question that eventually I would be asked. If we, how long is it good for? 6 months. Seller shall deliver to buyer documentation of compliance within 3 days, right? Which we generally, there's a way of changing this later, but why not? After execution of this form or the time specified in 3N of the agreement, whichever occurs last, the goal, of course, would be to get all this done in advance and have it in a way that you could share it with the buyer before you're in contract. If you've had an inspection and you happen to know that you are not in compliance, then you would check box 3. So the default setting is number 1, which is, I don't know, I've never had a report. 2 is, I do know, usually because I've had a report. I do know, and I'm in compliance. And step 3 is, I do know I'm not in compliance, right? Because I had a report. Now, paragraph C, buyer and seller agreement regarding which party shall obtain compliant. This is hardwired into the code. And so the first choice, which is the default choice, is that this is the responsibility of the buyer if there is no local ordinance. Right now, the reason why, if there is a local ordinance, that would be important because some of the local ordinances are point of sale ordinances, which means you got to do it before escrow closes, or you have to do it within a certain period of time. But let's assume that there is no local ordinance, then it's the buyer responsibility. And they have within 1 year of close of escrow to be compliant, right? Now, you're going to see there are 6 options. That's default. This is up to the buyer. Other choices are number 2, and you would be checking one of these, right? I mean, you wouldn't be, checking 3 or 4. Buyer responsibility, there is an ordinance. So we do know there's a local ordinance. And in this case, it allows either the seller or buyer to obtain documentation. Let's see, question. Does EXP have a list of cities with local ordinances? Like we can go and check and chart and see which one have, so no. And nobody has that list yet. I talked for a long time today to to some of the natural hazard disclosure companies, and they don't have a complete, nobody has a complete list yet, right? And so rather than waiting for EXP to develop a list for every little town and city and location in the state, if you've got a listing and it's in, Elk Grove, it's partly your responsibility as the listing agent to look into this. And by the way, that would not only include any fire hardening defensible space kind of local ordinances, but any other local disclosures like sewer lateral, right? And there's others. In Long Beach, they have a parking requirement. It's a form, it has to be certified, or you can't close escrow. In Santa Cruz County, they have low flow plumbing. And I know you might say, well, that everybody does. They're going to go look at your toilet and your shower in Santa Cruz County because it's a point of sale ordinances. And if you don't get it signed off, you can't sell the house. So it's your job as a listing agent to look into these things. How would you do that? You would call the city or county where the property is located, and you could call the building department or whatever. They would get you to the right place pretty quickly, and you say, hi, my name's Mike, I'm a real estate agent, and I have a property I'm going to be putting on the market, and it's located, in San Martin, and I'm just calling to find out, are there any special rules or things that I should know about? And they're going to tell you. But this is obviously, I mentioned this is a big issue, is that somebody has to find out. And even the NHD companies, some of the NHD companies said, we're going to have the local ones and include them. They don't, right? It was a marketing thing, but they don't actually have them. And even the big companies are saying, we don't have a complete list. And it keeps changing, they keep getting added. It's impossible to keep up on that completely. All right, so if there's a local ordinance and the local ordinance allows either the buyer or seller to fix it, to bring it up to the right level, then it's the buyer's responsibility. And the buyer would do it after escrow closes. Then what if there is a local management ordinance in effect, but it does not require compliance as a result of the sale of the property? What that means, the first one is a point of sale ordinance, but this one is not a point of sale ordinance, right? This is hey, you guys ought to do it. It's the law, but they're not going to come and check. Right? That's the difference between a point of sale ordinance and just an ordinance, right? For example, the whole state has a low water conserving plumbing fixtures law, but not every county makes it a point of sale ordinance where you have to have it certified or you can't sell the property, right? That's the difference. Buyer shall obtain documentation within 1 year of close of escrow, right? That's generally how long they give you to get your space defensible. So buyer responsibility, if we don't know, if there's no local ordinance, buyer responsibility, if there's a local ordinance and it's a point of sale ordinance, buyer responsibility, if it's a local ordinance but not a point of sale. Seller responsibility, again, it's either, is it a point of sale or is it not a point of sale or already done? So if the seller could be, you just check the box, right? So this would be part of your marketing, right? You understand, maybe if you're in a location where the property is in a high or very high fire severity, it might be a good marketing tactic. It might be a good thing for getting the property sold that your seller has done all this in advance, or at least agrees to have it done if it's a point of sale ordinance. And then seller responsibility is when it's already complete. And the last one, number 6, is where the seller is going to do this, and agree to obtain compliance. And it would be done prior to the time of the final, the walkthrough, right? So seller could say, it's a requirement, I know it's a requirement, I'm going to do it, right? I'm going to get you documents prior to the walkthrough. It could be the seller says, I've already done it, or it could be the seller says, I'm going to do it, whether or not it's a requirement. That's essentially what number 6 is. So most of the time, you're going to be leaving it as the default. But again, whether or not you're checking other boxes will depend on, is there a local ordinance? And if there is a local ordinance, is it a point of sale ordinance where we have to comply before we can close escrow? And then the question is, once we've identified that issue, is the seller going to pay for it and have it done, or the buyer? And again, if you had the inspection done in advance and you did all this, that would be helpful. And if you've got an inspection, you write in that you got an inspection from whom and how they could contact the person. And this is a required documentation, only applies if there's a state or local agency where the property is located is authorized to inspect the property, right? Now, this final inspection report disclosure is also required by the code. And basically it's saying that if the seller has ever had one of these inspections done, they're going to turn it over, right? And if they don't have it because their dog ate it or whatever, then they are going to tell the buyer where they could get a copy of it. And then seller signs, buyer signs. Now, one of the parts of this that has been added is what's called the tree, the defensible space tree. And the purpose of this, and some of you may be finding this ironic when you're looking at it, it's to make the process easier, right? That's what it is. And essentially, it's a group of steps that you go through, because the defensible space is the one that's the most complicated of all this, is you go through this and you can check boxes, and this can all be done digitally. So step 1 is asking, is the property located in an area where there's a local management ordinance, right? Something we've talked about, yes or no. Now, if you're having them go through the tree, or you're going through the tree with them, and let's say they check the box for yes, it automatically puts it in paragraph 3A where it's supposed to be. Right, remember in 3A, there were some boxes to check. If we go through this, it'll populate those other places. If you check no, then it's no, right? If the seller does not know, see the next column. And over here is, how do you find out if your property is subject to local defensible space law? Contact local fire marshal, contact CAL FIRE, contact your natural hazard disclosure company rep. But it may be, they may not know the local ones. Who else might know? A local title company or escrow company might know, because they see the forms coming through. Right? But that's a free one I've thrown in. Step 2, if yes is to step 1. If no, if there is no local, then notice it says just go to step 4. So you shoot all the way down here to step 4. So the only reason you would be going to step 2 and to step 3 is if you checked yes, right? If you check yes, then you go to step 2. If you check no, you go to step 4. So step 2 is, if you do know that there is a local ordinance, you check if yes, and the report documents the property is in compliance, effective on the date of sale. Then if that is true, if you've got information that shows you're in compliance, notice it says then sign the form, right? If you check yes, and you've got the documentation to prove done by an inspector, you just go down, you don't have to do anything else. You then sign the form. If you check yes and the report documents that the property is not in compliance, then you're going to go on to step 3. If you check no, but because paragraph, if you check no, there is no, you still go on, now you go to step 3, right? Does the local law require compliance with the law as a result of the sale of the property? Yes or no? If the answer is no, it is not a point of sale ordinance, and you check that box, then you just drop to the bottom and sign the form, right? See that there? You just sign the form, you go on with your life. If no, and the seller knows the property is not in compliance, right? The first box is if it is in compliance and it's not a point of sale, we sign the form. The second box is if there is no point of sale, but we know it's not in compliance, then we check the second box and then sign the form. Notice the then sign the form is repeated each time. You don't check multiple of these. They check one of these and then they go and sign the form, right? And it goes on with a local law requires the compliance as a result of the sale of the property. That means a point of sale. If yes, you go and sign the form. If no, the seller, depending on whether or not it's going to be brought into compliance or not. No local laws. Does the seller have a report prepared by an authorized, or if no? So again, what they're simply doing here is asking the questions that you're going to need to answer in order to fill out the pieces that's in the other section. How do I know if it's a point of sale ordinance? Lost your audio. Am I back? I don't know. So a point of sale ordinance, you have to call the local fire marshal and ask. It varies by city. So some cities have ordinances, but they don't make it a point of sale. And point of sale means someone's going to come and look at the property. They will not allow you to close escrow until they have a certification that the property is in compliance. All right. So I don't know if I need to go through each and every, one of these. You can see it's pretty much asking questions. And then based upon your checking of the boxes, it fills out the form. How to find out if the seller has obtained documentation of compliance, you get a copy of the report. A seller who but did not keep a copy can get one from CAL FIRE. How to find out if the property is in compliance, you need to have an inspection. And again, you can see there's a place to hire inspectors, which I showed you before, or a defensible space. Now, I've included a couple of the quick guides. One of them is about fire insurance, which is just sort of a related thing, which I thought you'd find interesting. And then there's a discussion of defensible space. And then this is the wildfire disaster advisory, where the advisory things were moved out and put into here. And this would be something that you might be going over together. Notice there's a lot of resources. Right? Fire hardening and defensible space advisory. All right, so let's say that link is not available. Which link is that? Somebody's saying the link is not available. Not sure what the link is. All right. Let's see, how would you actually do this in real life, right? As opposed to theory. I just read theory. Here we go. So FH guides and WFDA. This FHD link doesn't work, but I think you included the same thing in your Google Drive. Yeah, are you talking about the handout? I'm not really sure. All right, so I'm sorry, we're having issues. I've pasted in the chat a direct link. I pasted it in the chat. Right, so everybody got that. All right. So anyhow, I get direct link. Let's all blame Amazon. All right. All right. Why not? All right. So here we are. We're in a transaction. Now I'm going to talk about an easy way. So how do you get people to actually sign this? And let's find it. Here's the form. Right. So we open up the form, and some of the links that are inside that was a sample. You'll see will work when we open up the actual form. Do you have to, let's see, when you click on the link, that's what it says. I assume everybody can use the Google Drive link. If people are having difficulty with this, let me know. But I pasted it in twice, and we've tried. Yeah, okay. Everybody can get that. And if you're not, send me an email. All right. All right. Cool. So you should have no trouble. Also, all of this stuff is on zip forms and CAR. All right, so here we have the fire hardening defensible space. This is it in its natural form. Notice the orangey yellowish part at the top means you can fill this out as an agent. So you can put in the date, and you can put in I don't know. How about we have to pick something? How about that? No idea, but I'm going to go with it. All right, so we fill this out. All right, easy. This is a disclosure and addendum to the purchase agreement or other dated. So this date would be a date of a purchase agreement. It also could be or other. You could check that and just make it a addendum to just make it an addendum to a listing agreement or whatever, but just leave it this way is fine. A lot of times when we're doing this, we don't have the purchase agreement yet, right? So we could you either could fill that out or not at that point, right? But we'll do it by the time we get one. That part I already went through. Notice here, see all the grayed out boxes. The reason they're grayed out is because you're not supposed to be checking the boxes. That's supposed to be done by the seller. So you can't check the boxes. It doesn't work. See, editable by seller one. That's also an important point. If you have two sellers, only one seller is going to be allowed to answer the questions, and that's whoever you designate as seller one. So you can have seller one, seller two, seller three, but seller one is going to answer the questions when we send it out. Now the others are going to sign it, but only seller one is going to answer the questions. And again, these are all grayed out. We can't do anything, right? All of this is grayed out. So we would have to send it, right, in these boxes and things like that. Now, this may require that you be around when they're doing this. I'm just saying, right? Or you might. I'm just saying, right? This is a little bit more complicated. So let's say you were fine and you want to send it out for signature. Yes, it's complex. Yes, I know. The CAR thinks that they made it easier. I'm not 100% sure of that. But let's talk about how you could get it filled out. The easiest way to do it is to send it and share it through Zip, what's called Zip Community. And Zip Community isn't always easy to find, but what you have to do is go to parties. It's always nice to go to parties. And when you click on parties, and as far as I know, this is the only place where you could do it. When you click on parties, you're going to see there's a little button that says share. And when you click on that, there's two choices: public share, which we don't want to do. And what public share simply does is it gives you a URL where you could share a link to somebody specific to like a PDF. But what we want to do is to give the seller an opportunity to fill it out, which means we want a private share. You go for the great big box in the middle. And we click on that to start sharing. And what we do is we identify seller one. Again, if there's 4 sellers, it's seller number 1 who's actually going to have the opportunity to do this. And we're going to click on done. And then in sharing, we want them to be able to edit the forms. They can upload documents. So let's say they have that inspection. They have other documents. They could upload them and it would go right into your zip forms. They can view the history, yeah, whatever. And stop sharing date. They put in a date. You could change that. I'm not, I don't do that. And when we click on next, it's now going to ask, well, which documents do you want to do it? Now we could be doing the SPQ. We could be doing the TDS. This whole topic is TDS, don't you think? But let's say we're just doing fire hardening. We click on save and send. It writes a, why not? You could write them a little poem or something about why you're doing this, and you hit send. And then it's going to give you different choices. We're going to send it right through zip forms. But you can see there's Outlook as well as Google. So what is this going to look like when we come here? And we're going to have to wait for a moment. And not yet. Here we go. So this is what the client's going to get. And they, click on the box. And then what's going to happen is if they've already set up something, a password, they could, if they haven't, they could create an account. If they want to use Facebook or Google, why not? Right? Why not? And here. All right, here we go. The other one was probably already there. Great, create account. Oh, I know. I don't really want to do this now. How about this? Are you happy now? I just want you to let me in. All right, I'm going to just sign. I was not expecting this to be a problem. All right. So what you would see, assuming we could log in, the problem is that all my emails have been used at some point in time. Let's see if it will let me do it now. App not active. Well, what the client is going to get, is the ability to look at the form. I'm going to give up on that. They'll get the ability to look up the form, and the parts that you filled out are parts that they cannot change, and they can only fill out the parts that were grayed out before. And one of the advantages, this is called Zip Community. So one of the advantages, it would be really good if I could actually see the documents. How about this? I hope this works. I really, no, of course it doesn't work. Well, I can't get in to see it. That's just the way it is on this one. So one of the advantages, I'll just explain this, is if you're using this system and let's say there was a situation where they don't know what to do, right? Or they made a mistake or something like that. What you can do is, it's just beautiful, isn't it? That it just, nothing is working right at this moment. So what you can do is you can call them up and you can say to them, look at, thank you for filling out the form. I really appreciate it. But there's some things that we have to do, that there's some errors, maybe you didn't understand something. It doesn't look like that's the right answer. And then in real time, they could log back into their account, assuming they could create an account. They would log back into their account and they could change it, right? And then you could just, well, let me do this. Let's just see. All right, it took that one. Well, that was easy. So yeah, it's not going to let me do it because it thinks it knows, it recognizes the other one. So let's look at another way of sending it out, right? So this, at some point, you're going to want them to have a digital ink. I don't use DocuSign. I don't pay for extra things. So maybe, you're going to want them to create an account anyhow. Yours isn't going to be this difficult because when you send it to somebody, it's not like they already have used all their emails to log in to the system at some point. And they can edit it, right? Let me just be clear. And if you use the share, they can edit it easily afterwards and you could discuss it with them and it could go over a little bit of time and they could fix something. Another option is through using a program called Breeze. And Breeze comes with SkySlope, so some of you are familiar with that. And if we were to go to, here, let me just, in Breeze, one of the things we could do is, I need to get back to the beginning. It's been one of those days. All right. Breeze. Great. Start new disclosures. I already have a file. Why not? Next. And what we're going to do is we're just going to check the fire hardening and we're just going to check that. And then we're going to go ahead and send it. And it has its own email. We hit next and yeah, we hit send. And then when the email comes through, it's going to look like something soon. And then Breeze is basically asking them some of the same questions in a different format, right? And you click on it and away we go. Say yes. And I like Breeze. There isn't a lot of ads to buy insurance or stuff like that. So this is what the client would see. And there's a little explanation and there's some links and they would ask, these are the questions, right? The following features may make your home, are you aware of? And they say, yeah, no, no, yeah, no, no. And they go on, right? And so it's another way. Yeah, it's a bit friendlier. I like Breeze, right? Now, the one difference is that in the is the property local vegetation ordinance, right? See, here are the questions. No. Do you have a report? No. Would you bring the property into compliance before the sale? No, not going to do anything. Right? Have you obtained a final inspection? No, I haven't. Right? And then it goes on, and you can then review it, and here it is, and and it didn't fill out the tree. I'm not really too sure. The tree is not necessarily as important, but you get the idea. Is Breeze free? First of all, if you work for EXP or some other real estate companies, you have access to SkySlope, and the Breeze is built into it. I do believe that Breeze offers some free accounts for some things. I'm not entirely sure. They were at one point. Do we have to use zip forms if we can get, yeah, Breeze is a lot easier. And in fact, one of the other forms that I was going to suggest, and I really like SkySlope and I like Breeze, right? But let's say the other form that I was going to cover today, but we're running out of time, is the other form that you might have to fill out is called the earthquake. It's the earthquake disclosure. Here, let me just go back here to Breeze. And we're going to say new disclosures. And by the way, you can do your Avid and Breeze, although doesn't really have an app. It's got a mobile responsive site that you can use on your phone and you can dictate into it. But let's say we were going to do, in addition to the other ones, it's the earthquake. So what forms might your client have to fill out? Well, the fire hardening and defensible space, we've beaten that to death. Number 2 is the TDS, and the SBQ is number 3. Number 4 could be the earthquake form. Now, the earthquake form is technically, legally, not required unless the property was built prior to January 1st, 1960. That's why they're asking when was the property built. If it's a wood frame residence built before January 1st, 1960, this is a required disclosure. If it's a masonry building built before January 1st, 1975, it's a required disclosure. So let's say our property was built in 1955, right? So we click on next, right? Then it's going to ask, are we an entity? No, we're not. Here's the email. We're going to click on next, and we're going to hit send. And then out it goes. And then within a moment or two, in a breeze, as it were, here is what we were just sent. We start our disclosures. We say, yeah, I agree. This is way friendlier than using zip forms. That's why these companies, are doing something. We go to the form, and again, it gives us a little, this is some of the stuff from the code for the seller to read. It's help on answering the questions. And then property features. Is the water heater braced to resist falling during an earthquake? Yes, no, doesn't apply, not sure. I'm going to say yes, it is. All right. And there's a guide that you could click on if you wanted to, but we're not going to do that. This is part of a earthquake hazards booklet. Is your home bolted to its foundation? I don't know. I've never looked. Right. And again, if you wanted to, you could, or this, if you click on it, it actually pulls up the guide right there for people to read. Not sure, right? But is the exterior crawl space, which is sometimes called a cripple wall, Google search it if you're not sure what they look like, braced? Yeah, why not? Is the foundation unconnected concrete? Has it been strengthened? No. And again, at any point, and notice they telling you where in the guide people could read this stuff. I find that very useful. If the exterior is made of has it been strengthened? And no. Is your home built on the hillside? No. Are there tall posts that have been strengthened? Yeah, sure. Right. So then they go through, and this is relatively easy for them to do. Unreinforced masonry means it's a brick building. No. Is your home a room over the garage? No. And then when we're done, we click on it. And so that's that form, right? The one that you may see, you know, stuck among all the different disclosures, and then it can be sent for review, right? And so when that's done, so it now goes to me as the agent, as opposed to me as a seller, and then I can look at it and make sure that it was all, you know, nice and filled out properly. And if so, then I can send it for signatures. I don't know if you found, I find that doing things in Breeze is just a lot simpler to fill out all of this, but I showed you their tree. When I looked at the tree that CAR did, I was not sure that that was helping, but they've made it. I've shared it with you. Breeze seems to go through the same questions. That's how you do the earthquake one. I didn't get a chance to go through all the other little disclosures. Most of the others don't require the seller to answer questions, right? What I did last week and this week is I went through the forms that really require the seller to answer questions. Next, I'm believing that what I'm going to do next week is to go through the different addendums that appear in the RPA grid and what do they mean and when would you do it. Would you go through this with your sellers or just send it to them? Every time I've done this, I've actually had to talk to them about it. Every time. Sometimes we do a Zoom call so I can see their screen. Sometimes they're doing it when I'm there. One of the things I like about Breeze, and this Zip Forms has a mobile app too, but if I do all the prep work and in advance, like putting in all the information about the client and all of that sort of stuff, then it's really easy to do from my cell phone. And so when if they have a computer, right, and I'm at their house and I ask them to log in, I do it right then and there while I'm standing there. Right now, there are some clients that I can just send the TDS, the SPQ, and these things to, and they'll answer all the questions, and they won't have any questions. But if not, then they're going to be asking me, what does this mean? What does this mean? It's either better to be physically there so you can see them working through it on the screen, or using a Zoom shared, Google Meet or something where you can, go through it, or you could be doing it over the phone where you have a copy of the form and they have a copy of the form, and you give them a little bit of guidance. All right. I hope that you found that useful. Otherwise, I don't know. My feelings will be hurt. Okay, thank you. Next week, we're going to talk about all of the fun addendums. All right, doesn't that sound like fun? Yes, Marlene, I'll call you later. Bye, everybody.